Your compass points to the magnetic North Pole. Now here in Florida, it doesn't affect us because we're pretty much straight line. But if you live in Alaska, there's quite a difference. Pilots have to really watch for this angle of declination because the North Pole is not really the North Pole. And they have to allow how many degrees to change their navigation based upon, because it's pointing magnetic north, not geographic north. It appears that the Ice Age, you can look at the map here, it appears that the Ice Age is centered around the magnetic North Pole. There was more ice in America than there was in Russia, for instance. The Ice Age effects came down further. Here's what I think happened. The mammoths were up there chomping on their tropical flowers, enjoying a wonderful meal, and all of a sudden it began to snow. They had never seen snow before. So one of them said, "Herman, this is peculiar weather we got going on here. Let's get out of here." They started running around, and the snow got deeper and deeper, and pretty soon they ended up in snow so deep they couldn't even fall over. How many of you have ever been in snow so deep you couldn't fall down? You don't get that in Florida much, but you guys do in South Dakota, don't you? And the mammoths ended up standing up, suffocating in 300 below zero, super cold snow. They froze in 5 hours under those conditions. Because a large chunk of meat takes a long time to freeze. You ladies know if you freeze or thaw a large turkey or something, it takes 24 hours to freeze or thaw 12 inches. Well, the mammoths are found frozen so quickly the food in their stomach is still green, still recognizable. It didn't keep digesting after they died. As the ice would go spreading out across the countryside, it would leave behind scratches in the rock like you see in Kelly's Island, Ohio, or all across Indiana or Illinois. There are glacial grooves. Yes, there actually was an ice age, but it wasn't millions of years ago. I think it was triggered at the time of the flood. There are basically two theories about the ice age among creationists. One theory says the flood caused the ice age. My theory says the ice age caused the flood. Very similar. I think the ice age actually caused the flood to start. I don't think you're going to explain 5 million mammoths perishing at one time if the ice age came after the flood, because mammoths are a little slow reproducing. It takes a couple years to have a baby mammoth, okay? And to get 5 million of them is going to take a long time. So I think the ice age had to come in and trigger the flood. Then the ice would still last for a few hundred years afterwards, but probably that was the trigger. So the earth had these big cold spots. Cold air hits warm air, causes it to rain. It rained 40 days and 40 nights. The canopy that used to protect the earth collapsed, and everybody drowned. The Bible says the fountains of the deep broke open. I think because of the impact, or maybe because of the weight of the earth, or the changing in the tilt, or just the near miss of a comet, just something going by, the gravitational tug would flex the crust of the earth, causing it to crack. Several things could have happened, releasing the fountains of the deep. If you get the book of Jasher, we sell it in our bookstore. I don't know that this is the one mentioned in the Bible, okay? There's a book of Jasher and a book of Enoch mentioned in the Bible. There are some floating around in circulation. Neither may be legitimate. It appears the book of Enoch is actually a forgery by one of the cults who wanted to document, to say, well, the Bible says right here, certain doctrines, things that they teach. So they wrote their own book of Enoch, knowing nobody had ever found the book of Enoch. Book of Jasher may be that way too, I don't know. But it says in Jasher chapter 6, on that day the Lord caused the whole earth to shake. And the sun darkened, and the foundations of the earth raged, and the whole earth was moved violently. And the lightning flashed, and the thunder roared, and all the foundations of the earth were broken up. Fascinating book to read. If you want to get the book of Jasher, it's like $10 in our bookstore. But I think this is another description of what happened at the time of the flood. The earth actually broke apart. Something caused it. Walt Brown says the earth was stretched, over the water. I agree, but he doesn't have a mechanism. And I talked to him about it. I said, what caused the earth to crack? He said, I don't know. It just did. Well, maybe so. But I think, outer space meteor strike is one possible solution to that. So this dump of ice on the poles caused the earth to crack. That released the fountains of the deep. The rapidly spreading ice caused the ice age effects. It caused the burial of the mammoths. It made the earth wobble for a few thousand years, and it made the pre-flood canopy collapse. It rained 40 days and 40 nights, and the earth was completely covered by water. The Bible says in Genesis chapter 7, all the high hills under the whole heaven were covered. This is not a local flood. When I debated Hugh Ross on the John Ankerberg show for 3 hours, I said, Dr. Ross, do you believe in a universal flood? No, I said, do you believe in a worldwide flood? He said, I believe in a universal flood. Now, I know what he really believes, and I thought that was a deceitful answer. I said, what do you mean a universal flood? He said, well, it flooded Noah's little universe, which was the valley that he lived in. There was no reason to flood the whole world, he says, because, why kill the penguins? They didn't do anything wrong. Well, that sounds good, but it's not scriptural, okay? The Bible says the hills were covered. The whole mountains were covered. If you shrank the earth down to the size of this 12-inch globe, all the water in the oceans would not even fill a tablespoon at this scale. I mean, I flew back over the Pacific. I told one of the guys in my office, I said, man, the Pacific Ocean is huge. And he said, oh, that's just the top of it. That's quite a thought. But even though there's huge amounts of water on this planet, when you shrink it down to this scale, it won't even fill a tablespoon. 3 miles of water spread over the world is thinner than the paper on this globe at this scale. This is 8,000 miles across the earth. 3 miles compared to 8,000 is nothing. And if you smoothed out the earth right now, if you just smoothed it out, push the mountains down, lift the oceans up, level everything out, there's enough water out there right now to cover the earth 1.5 miles deep. Everywhere. People say, where'd all the water from the flood go? Oh, it's still here. It's gathered into big puddles called oceans. The water's still here from that flood. And the Pacific Ocean is gigantic, and that's just one of the oceans, okay? When they climbed Mount Everest in 1953, they began to find something strange up near the top of Mount Everest, the tallest mountain that we know of in the world. They began to find petrified clams in the closed position. Petrified clams on top of Mount Everest. Up in Peru, 2 miles above sea level, recently they found giant oysters 11.5 feet wide, weighing 600 pounds. Petrified oysters in the closed position. Now you can walk along the beach here in Pensacola and find 1 billion seashells. You hardly ever find a matched pair, and you never find them closed if they're dead. As soon as they die, they open. How do you get petrified clams in the closed position on top Mount Everest? Well, Your Honor, I'd like to argue first of all that Mount Everest is a little ways from the beach. Okay, right there. Number 2, clams don't climb mountains very well. Number 3, when a clam dies, it opens. So how can we explain petrified closed clams on top of Mount Everest? One atheist I debated said, do you think the water covered Mount Everest? I said, well, Mount Everest was underwater, but Mount Everest wasn't there. The mountains actually arose during the last part of the flood. Sometimes they find petrified clams in beds up to 10 feet thick. Solid petrified clams, 10 feet. A guy in Alabama, I spoke up there in his church in central Alabama. He said, hey, you want some more petrified clams? I said, yeah. Why? He said, they're 4 feet thick in my backyard. Every time I rototill my garden, I bring up thousands of petrified clams, closed. I got a bunch of them here, little tiny ones. Petrified clams in the closed position. I think that's evidence they were buried alive in mudslides, which would happen during the flood, and they woke up dead, couldn't open. And they ended up petrified. It doesn't take long for things to petrify. Petrified eggs are found, like this picture here shows. We got 3 dinosaur eggs on the table. You can come see. Those are real petrified dinosaur eggs. Petrified jellyfish. Petrified octopus arm. Soft-bodied creatures just don't petrify today. They get eaten by somebody. Even animals don't petrify in the jungle of Africa. They get scattered all over the place. You know, the bones are dragged around, and even the bones get chewed up. What happened? Well, the Bible says the fountains of the deep broke open. I think the earth got hit, it wobbled for a while, and it cracked apart, and the water underneath that used to be there, mentioned in Psalm 136 and Psalm 24, came shooting to the surface. Then this dump of ice would cause all these effects that we talked about, and the earth, the canopy would collapse. It rained 40 days and 40 nights. We still have the scars today where the earth broke open. They're called the fault lines. And you can study earth science from this perspective, and it makes a whole lot more sense, I think. The hot water coming out from inside the crust of the earth would hit the regular water and kill critters like crazy. As the water came shooting out, it's going to lift up the basalt underneath as the continental plates slide back. As they slide back, it's going to cause what are called, it'll make what's called wrinkled mountains, folded mountains. In British Columbia, where I was yesterday, they have mountain ranges there that are obviously pushed from the end, and it's wrinkled up. Wrinkled mountains like this have to be pushed from sideways. This water came shooting out, probably would kill everything in the ocean within a few hundred miles of the cracks. Because hot water, when it hits regular water, kills the fishies. If you poured a gallon of boiling water into your aquarium, you would kill the fishies within a certain radius, okay? And when hot water comes out, it does that. All over the world, diatomaceous earth is found, sometimes in huge collections like the one in Lompoc, California. Now, diatoms are really, really tiny, glass-bodied creatures. Under the microscope, they look gorgeous. There's some diatoms here. When they float around in the ocean, they die. When they sink to the bottom, then their kids die and sink to the bottom, and the grandkids die and sink to the bottom. And it takes about 1,000 years to get 1 inch of diatoms. They are so tiny. You can take diatomaceous earth, you can buy it at the hardware store, and you can sprinkle around your house, and it is so tiny, insects get it stuck in the pores of their skin, and it kills the insects. It's a good, purely natural insecticide. It's real cheap. Diatomaceous earth is used in swimming pool filters. It's used in detergents. It's used in fertilizers. It's used for kitty litter. Oil dry is made of diatomaceous earth. Well, I went out to Lompoc, California when I was preaching out there. I went and visited the largest diatomaceous earth quarry in the world, I think. The diatomaceous earth is 1,500 feet thick. They dig it out with bulldozers and, huge cranes. They're digging out this diatomaceous earth. I asked the guy, the foreman at the job there, I said, do you find anything unusual in this diatomaceous earth? He said, oh, we find millions, probably trillions of fossils. Here's a fish fossil in diatomaceous earth. These little herring are found by the billions. Actually, he gave me a chunk of diatomaceous earth from the quarry. This is it right here. It's just like chalk, so if you handle it, it's going to break. It's real lightweight. This one little square foot here probably contains 40 to 60 fish fossils. Can you see the skeletons in there? Just in 1 square foot. He said it's this way everywhere. What happened? They were digging in the diatomaceous earth quarry in 1976, and they came across the skeleton of a whale. A baleen whale standing on end. The whale was 80 feet long. Now, the layers of diatoms were also tilted, so it wasn't the height of the whale that becomes the problem, but the thickness of a whale, maybe 8 or 10 or 15 feet thick. Now, if it takes 1,000 years for an inch of diatoms to accumulate, how are you going to preserve an entire whale skeleton? You think the whale's going to lay at the bottom of the ocean for 50,000 years waiting to get preserved? No, I think something's going to go eat it, right? The rapid accumulation of diatoms, to me, indicates there was a flood when hot water came shooting out, and it just so happens Lompoc, California, is right on the San Andreas fault line. I think that's one of the places where the earth cracked open, the water came out, and it killed the diatoms within a few hundred miles, and they snowed to the bottom. And the swirling waters would put them in big, huge, thick layers, and they're digging them out today. And there's a big chunk of it right there. You can come see for yourself, the diatomaceous earth. The chalk cliffs of Dover, also 300 feet thick of solid chalk. Actually, the Latin word Cretia means chalk. So the Cretaceous age, they talk about in the textbook, comes from the age of chalk. That's all baloney. There wasn't a chalk age. There were layers of chalk formed during the flood. Thick layers of chalk, sometimes accumulating in little piles. And this calcite would get together and end up in huge piles like they have in the chalk cliffs of Dover over there, 300 feet thick. The Bible says in Genesis 7, the waters prevailed and increased greatly upon the earth. And the ark went upon the waters. In the Hovind theory, during the first few months of the flood, dead animals would settle out. They would get buried. Swirling water would tend to make them go in little eddies or end up with fossil graveyards. Moving water, if you go along a river during flood stage, you'll see little eddies, swirling, little mini whirlpools. Stuff tends to accumulate in those. And then when it gets buried, you'd get, piles of gravel, for instance, like they have in South Bend, Indiana. Huge gravel beds. Probably the whole Florida peninsula is all basically sand. Maybe that was a big swirling eddy that deposited a giant sandbar, which we call Florida and live on today. This would happen during a worldwide flood. Many of the features of the earth, if you think of it from a flood perspective, this is the best explanation to explain these things. Moving water automatically sorts particles by density. Heavier stuff drops out first. As the current slows down, different stuff drops out. We've got this thing on the table here. You can play with these things all day. You can buy them at the mall. Different colors of sand. When you flip it over, as the sand drops down, it automatically makes more layers. There's only two different colors of sand in there, black and white, 2 different densities. Why doesn't it just make all the dark stuff at the bottom or denser and all the light stuff at the top? And instead, it always makes multiple layers. During a flood, you get this same phenomenon, not just denser at the bottom and lighter on top. You'd get them all mixed together. And it'll make many layers. You can watch it. We're talking about something else. You don't have to watch it. You can watch it all the time if you like. But anyway, these multiple layering happens during a flood also. There are several phenomena that happen with rapidly moving mud. Underwater landslides are called turbidity currents, and they can go incredibly fast. Back in 1929, the transatlantic cable was cut. They had an earthquake, and there was a mudslide underwater. There were several cables. They knew how far apart they were, and so when the one cable got snapped and the next cable got snapped, they knew the exact times when the cable was snapped. And they calculated the mud was going 70 miles an hour underwater and covered 40,000 square miles.